right, cool. Good afternoon,
sorry.
everybody. Really great to be here with you. It's our morning here, of course. I had the great pleasure of coming to Scotland earlier this year, and wow, what a great place and a lot of fun. So I had an opportunity to meet some students while I was there, and I feel and I know that the future of Scotland and engineering and STEM is on the rise, and we're looking forward to having hopefully a Scottish astronaut flying in space at some point in time before too long. And my job here today is to sort of tell you a little bit about what it's like to be an astronaut. But that also starts, I think, where you guys are a little bit before when I was your age, looking at what I was going to do when I grew up. My dad actually came to the U.S. from India. He became a doctor in India, but he came to the United States to do his residency. And at that point in time, he met my mother in Ohio, and they met and got married. And I was the youngest of three kids. So I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. There's a lot of colleges around there. I was thinking about what I was going to do, going through high school. I was a pretty good student, and I think that just helps, initially open doors when you're young and you study hard. And I was also a swimmer, so I spent a lot of time doing athletic stuff. When I applied to colleges, though, which you guys are probably eventually thinking about, you're wondering, what are you going to do? I wanted to be a veterinarian. My dad was a doctor. I loved animals. I was a swimmer, and I had long hair. Those are some of the things that defined me when I was growing up. I applied to a bunch of schools, some in Massachusetts where I grew up, and I knew and I was comfortable with, some around the country. One of them happened to be the Naval Academy where my brother went to school. He recommended it because my family did a lot of outdoor stuff. Scotland is prime for people who are hiking around, and this is what we did when we were kids. We hiked, we camped, and my brother recommended the military for me because we did a lot of that outdoor stuff. So I didn't really know what I was getting into. I went to the Naval Academy, had to cut off all my hair, and joined the military. It was, for me, a shock. Honestly, it was something that was out of my what I was used to. It was just a little uncomfortable, but I really started to like it because there was a big sense of teamwork, leadership, followership, opportunities. Put you in a situation where you're a little uncomfortable and you can potentially thrive and work with people to accomplish goals. So I really liked it. That led me to the path of being able to be a helicopter pilot. At the end of the school year, we select what we want to do, and I of course was looking at things that were comfortable that I was thinking of because I was a swimmer, thinking maybe I would be a diver. That opportunity got taken away because somebody else took that billet and I didn't get it. So second place, I go, well, I guess I'll fly. And of course, the coolest thing is to fly jets, and so I wanted to fly jets. There wasn't that many billets for that. I got helicopters. And I just bring these couple things up because at those times in my life, which I was about, like 17 the first time and 22 or so the second time, I sort of felt like, oh, I'm not getting what I wanted, not getting that first place thing. And I don't know, what's going to happen with the rest of my life. But actually, what that did was open doors to things that I had never thought I would do. So it gave me all sorts of new opportunities. I became a helicopter pilot, and while I was a helicopter pilot, all of a sudden that engineering degree that I got from the Naval Academy sort of, woke up in my brain. I said, well, how does this thing work? How does it actually fly? And so some people recommended, why don't you go to test pilot school? And then you could really apply the engineering degree that you got and understand how helicopters and airplanes fly. So I did that, and I loved it. That was like one of the favorite things, my favorite things in my career that I've done was to go test different types of airplanes and helicopters. Awesome. That led me naturally to NASA Astronaut Office. Our test pilot school class had the opportunity to come to Johnson Space Center. First time I ever met an astronaut, John Young. He talked about doing vertical landings to land on the moon, and I said to myself, wow, I've never thought about this before, but maybe I have that skill, so maybe I'll get to go to the moon one day. So anyway, that's the whole long story about how I got here. It all has to do with engineering. It all has to do with teamwork and working together. I was in the 17th group of astronauts that came to NASA, and I've had the opportunity over a pretty long career here to fly in space 2 times, and getting to use my test pilot skills in the new flights that were coming up with the new spacecraft, the Boeing Starliner. So really looking forward to that. I've had a lot of jobs here in the astronaut office, and a lot of them have to do with engineering and using your engineering judgment to understand how to solve a problem. One of my first jobs here, I got to actually go to Russia and work with the Russian Space Agency and the cosmonauts and the engineers over there as they were getting ready to launch their portions of the International Space Station. So it was really interesting to be able to, this is totally what engineers do, is look at how to solve problems from different perspectives. So we saw how the Russians were designing their spacecraft. We saw how we are designing our spacecraft. You can look at the best of both worlds, compare them, and try to make something better in the future. And that's, I think, what we're doing with Commercial Crew. And in the future, Orion, which will be taking us possibly back to the moon and then on to further places, getting closer and closer to Mars. So there's a lot going on here, as maybe I alluded to. The International Space Station is flying. We're launching people coming up pretty soon, like in this next month, to the International Space Station on the Russian Soyuz. We're also working on the Commercial Crew program, which I'm now involved with, for not only Boeing, but also SpaceX and their Dragon capsule. And then in the meantime, we're also working on Orion that I mentioned real quickly, which is NASA's spacecraft, which is going to take us out of low Earth orbit and further on. That's something that I hope many of you will get involved with. So it's pretty exciting times here. I'm lucky to have flown in space, but at some point in time, I got to retire. I'm getting a little older, and we need you guys to take our place. So with that, I would like to open it up to questions if you guys have some. You guys still hear me?
I think their mics are muted. Yep, they've got to unmute.
Oh, the questions are coming in the feed.
She's supposed to read them. She's going to scan and read them.
It looks like there's a lot of questions. I see sort of a scrolling thing on the side of the screen there. So that's awesome. So I'm looking forward to you picking them out, and I'll be ready to answer them.
Can you read them from there?
No, it's a little bit small on the side of the screen.
Okay, what is it like in space? That's one question.
Okay, so let's just start off real quickly with what's it like in space? Space is awesome. That's why I think I keep going back, and my husband's like, really, why do you keep going back? It's, don't you love it here on Earth? Yes, I do love it here on Earth. I totally miss my husband. I miss my dogs. I miss my family. I miss walking on the beach. I think those are the types of things that you don't have, those sensations of wind on your face or water on your, as you're walking, sand under your feet and walking in the water. But space is awesome. And you're only going to be there for a small amount of time. I mean, 6 months relatively in all of your life is a pretty small amount of time. And, you get it. It's just such a different experience when you launch into space on a rocket. That, first of all, is just incredibly cool. You're just here on top of this big thing that's actually, propelling itself right off the planet. The shuttle is like 7.5 million pounds of thrust. These other rocket Soyuz and the ones that I'm going to be flying on are a little bit less because they don't weigh as much. But still, the sensation's pretty spectacular as you get propelled off the planet. And then once you get to orbit, which depends on your spacecraft, or shuttle, it was about 7.5 minutes. For these new rockets, it's about 10 minutes. All of a sudden, boom, the engines shut off, and you are floating in space. You can't help it. You can't get away from it. Your hair's floating. Your hands are floating. Everything's floating. You conscientiously put your arms back down. It doesn't take much energy to do that, but if you didn't, your arms would be floating. For example, if somebody's sleeping, their arms sort of float up a little bit. I mean, your pens are floating. As soon as you take your helmet off, it's floating. Your gloves are floating, and it's actually a really fun and cool sensation. And also, the second thing about that is you can fly. When you're in a big spacecraft like the International Space Station, which is, the middle of it is essentially like an airliner. You can take 30 seconds to fly from one end of the spacecraft to the other. It's pretty fun. And then, those are just the, quick sensations of being in space. But then working in space is really fun too. The experiments that we have up there and the way we work up there is a little different from Earth, because here gravity is influencing everything we do. In space, you have to design things a little bit differently. For example, we had an aquarium up in space. And an aquarium is not going to work like it works here on Earth with you pour the water in. you have to actually push the water in and then suck out the air bubbles, for example, so the fish can live. So, that's just, a small example of how living in space is just a lot different, but it's fun. And when you look out the window and then see our planet, it's just incredible, understanding where you are and what you're doing.
We have another question. From Hollyfield Primary, are you planning to visit Mars?
Am I planning to visit Mars? I wish. I'm getting a little bit older. I'm hoping that I'm helping out right now as we're laying the foundation for the spacecraft that will go to Mars. We have spacecraft that have been to Mars, but they're smaller spacecraft that wouldn't accommodate a human being at this moment in time. They also don't have the stuff that would be able to provide you oxygen and remove the carbon dioxide, provide you food, provide you a place to go to the bathroom. So all those things have to be worked into a spacecraft. And that is why we have the International Space Station. We're testing out all these systems so that when you guys grow up, when you guys get into college, maybe you'll be thinking about going to Mars and we'll have had it all done for you. So there's a little bit of work to be done between here and there. I wish I was going, but I'll be sitting back watching you guys go.
We have another question from Miss Lee's class. How do you land safely?
Oh man, how do you land safely? This is a really good question and it's hard to solve. In the beginning space programs, we had a capsule that landed back in the ocean under a parachute. It was great because we had a ship right nearby that was going to pick them up. So that worked out pretty good. It still is a little dangerous. I'm in the Navy, right? So I know that going out on the ocean, it's a little dangerous no matter where you are, what you're doing. Orion and these new capsules are also going to land under a parachute. Orion will land in the water. SpaceX Dragon capsule will also land in the water. And Boeing Starliner is planned to land on land, but they have the ability to land on water if they had to. Now you want to have, in the picture in the back behind me, you saw a ship. You want to have a ship nearby that's going to be able to pick you up and get you out of the water, because the water is, like I said, a little bit of a dangerous place. The shuttle, if you remember, it sort of looked like an airplane. It had little wings, and so it was able to come back and land on a runway. And that's really nice too, because it's a nice controlled place that you're going to land and somebody will be there and they will be able to help you get all your stuff, you and your stuff out of the spacecraft. So that would be convenient. But, when we go to the moon, when we go to Mars, what I say is there's really no runway there. So we have to know how to land under a parachute or some type of vertical landing thing, like the way I initially even got here in the first place when I learned how to fly helicopters, and I learned John Young needed to learn how to fly something that landed vertically. There's a lot of different ways to land a spacecraft, but you have to realize where you're landing and then make the spacecraft like that.
Okay, we have another question. Do you feel younger when you're in space?
Do you feel younger when you're in space? Huh, interesting. I think so, because the environment where you are is like so new and so interesting that I think you feel like there's so much you need to learn. And like when you're here on Earth, you've done the same thing, particularly as an adult, right? You've done the same thing all the time. You drive to work, you go to work, and you go home. You have to cut the grass or whatever you have to do. It's sort of routine. But up in space, it's so different. Everything is new. You feel like a little kid. And secondly, another thing that happens is there is a fluid shift, right? So when you're up in space, water inside your body here on Earth, water inside your body actually starts to tends to fall down a little bit. In space, it equalizes. And what that looks like, it looks like people have a little bit of a fuller face. You can see I have some cheekbones here. In space, they sort of went away. My whole face got a little filled up, which is nice if you're a little older and you have a little bit of wrinkles. Those sort of all go away, so you feel like you look a little bit younger. So I guess you feel a little younger in space. Maybe that's why I like it. I don't know.
We have several schools and students asking about what you eat in space.
Oh, wow. So, food in space is actually pretty darn good. They have all sorts of stuff. We have stuff that's made here in the United States. Some of the stuff is what we call irradiated, like it's in a package like this. All you have to do is put it in we have like a suitcase that has little springs on it that you could shove it in there real tightly with a heating element so it will heat it up. So we had everything in this type of stuff. It was like lasagna, sweet and sour tofu, fiesta chicken with chicken with spices on it, and we always had tortillas up there. We love tortillas because bread is problematic. Bread makes crumbs, and crumbs go everywhere, just like, your hair goes everywhere, but the crumbs and popcorn or chips or anything like that would go flying all over. So instead of having crumbs with bread, we had tortillas. So we put a lot of stuff on a tortilla. But we also have stuff that you rehydrate in this type of container right here. For example, this is mashed potatoes. Who would have known? Doesn't look that good actually right now, but you put water in there and maybe heat it up in that suitcase heater thing, and then it would taste pretty good. You just have to cut this open and eat it. We have drinks, all sorts of drinks. Drinks come in a container like this. This little piece right here is where you stick in a little pin that shoots in water. This is tropical punch, for example, but we had milk and like milkshakes, peach milkshakes flown up there. We had really good Russian food also, Russian juice that came in containers similar to this. We had food, like I mentioned, Russia real quickly. We had Russian food, we had American food. I flew the Japanese gentleman. We had Japanese food. We had some food from Europe, which was really awesome. So the food is a pretty good variety, and the nutritionists here on Earth want to make sure that we have the good nutrition. So we have about a 10-day cycle of food that makes sure that you have good nutrition. And then your family can send you some special stuff. You get like a little care package. So I grew up at a place that makes this specific marshmallow fluff, and I love that stuff. And so I had my family send that up to me. So, on those down days, like on Sunday, when we had the extra time, I would take out my special food and be able to eat that. And one of the really nice things about food is it makes people come together. So that's one of those things where we would all come around the table, share our special food with each other on the weekends, and it really made us team building. So it was really, really nice. Food is great. Food is good.
So we have a couple of questions related to what it feels like to travel at 17,500 miles an hour, and is it hard to do spacewalks at that speed?
Okay, so when we're flying around the planet, we have to orbit at a certain speed so we don't fall back. Gravity is still pulling us back to Earth, right? At the height that we're at, which is about 250 miles above the planet, we fly at 17,500 miles an hour. That keeps us orbiting around the Earth. If we slow down, we start to come back toward Earth. So, however, one of the good things about that is there's really not any air. That's a bad thing because you can't go outside for a walk or anything like that, but there's no air. And air is the thing that when you're like driving in the car, you put your hand out the window, it's pushing back on your hand. In space, you don't have that sensation. So the spacecraft is flying 17,500 miles an hour. When you go out to do a spacewalk, you are essentially just flying in formation with the spacecraft at 17,500 miles an hour. You don't have that sensation of air pushing you back like you do here on Earth. Now, the crazy sensation that you do have, though, is you look down and oh my God, there's your planet below you, and you're going pretty fast across it. Of course, it's not so fast that our planet is so big, so it's not that fast that you can't pick out stuff. We were up there, we took pictures all over the planet, in trying to identify different areas. But we also have windows inside the space station that we can take pictures too. But flying at 17,500 miles an hour, you notice it when you are inside in the cupola, for example, taking a picture. As soon as you focus your camera on something, it's like gone. So you have to take pictures pretty quick, and you have to be pretty fast and good at taking pictures. But feeling on the spacewalk, that's not the major sensation, is the speed. I think the major sensation is like, whoa, where am I? And look at how fast I'm going across the planet, but I don't have that feeling pushing on me.
Lennoxtown Primary asked, who inspired you to do engineering?
Who inspired me to do
engineering?
Engineering. Oh, wow. I think engineering, I think it came natural to me, honestly, because I was interested in science when I was a kid. I loved science and I loved math. Math primarily because I had a big book and I wanted to get my math homework done before I went home, and I didn't have to carry my book home, so I would do my math homework at lunch. But it came easy to me, so I wanted to just pursue those types of things. Like I mentioned, I thought I really wanted to be a veterinarian when I was growing up, following my dad's footsteps as a doctor, because I love animals. Now I understand I probably wouldn't have loved it because I would hate to hurt them or do anything to them, but I love animals, and so engineering sort of came a little bit more natural and a little bit easier. Who inspired me? I would say my science teachers and my math teachers when I was in elementary school and middle school and high school. In college, actually, it was probably some of the other officers or some of the mentors that we had. And I knew that they had engineering degrees. And I knew engineering degrees would make it easier to do other physical jobs that we do in the military, like fly airplanes or drive a ship, drive a submarine. If you had an engineering degree, you just sort of understand all of those systems and how they work. And so I think more so just the other mentors that I had. And then, and when getting further on in life, when I was thinking about being a test pilot and thinking about coming to NASA, I think it was more so just friends around who encouraged me to do that. So surround yourself with people who like to do that stuff, and you'll find that naturally it will come.
What was your school like, and did you get bullied?
Wow. What was my school like, and did I get bullied? Very interesting. I grew up in a town outside of Boston a number of years ago when I was young, and we were really the only Indian family around. We had to go into the town I grew up in was called Needham. It's about 20 minutes outside of Boston. We'd have to go into Boston to actually interact with any other Indian people. So I wouldn't say that I was bullied, but my family stuck out. Everybody knew the Pandias, which was my maiden name. And we were all swimmers, and so everyone knew us as the Indian swimmers when I was growing up. So I don't think I was necessarily bullied, but definitely stuck out, and people knew us, in a positive or a negative way, because we were different when I was growing up. I understand, though, bullying is a thing that's going on that people recognize a lot more nowadays, and that's tough. And you just have to be able to stand up and circle yourself with good friends who will support you, and stand up to people like that, because they obviously just have an issue that they need to solve, and it's not your issue.
So a few interesting questions that involve fluid physics. If you had enough water, could you have a swimming pool in space? Or what happens when you cry? The whole bathing, so talk a little bit about water in space.
So water in space is awesome. It's the coolest thing. Everybody likes to play with water in space. I mentioned this drink, for example, right here. And we actually put a straw in this so you can drink out of it. Otherwise, it's closed up. There's a valve in here, like a closed valve. So you stick the straw in, and then you can drink. You open up that straw, the water will start to come out. And naturally, by surface tension, it forms a nice sphere. If you let a whole bunch out, it will get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Actually, one time I was drinking a coffee out of that bag, and it was hot, and I didn't close the straw, and then this thing started getting bigger, and I had this major ball of coffee like this, and I didn't want anybody to come around me because then the coffee would go everywhere. But I'd wait till it sort of cooled down a little bit, then I just sucked it in. So water makes this amazing sphere. Like I said, it would get bigger and bigger, but if anything touches it, and that's why I was protecting that coffee sphere, it's going to sort of start to dissipate. It would make a whole bunch of different little spheres of water or coffee or whatever. So to have a swimming pool, that would be a little bit tricky. You could probably fill a module with water, but there would probably be air pockets around it. It would be just big spheres of water that you could swim through, I suppose. I think you can see one behind me here that folks up on the space station were playing with right there. You can stick your whole face in the sphere, which is pretty fun also. I think the video has the camera actually going inside of the sphere, so you're inside the sphere of water, and you can also see there's little air pockets in that water as well. So water almost seems like it's like jello in space. Obviously it's not that thick, but that's the appearance that it has.
And do you have enough water when you're in space?
So I have this question coming back to you, so I'll make a little hesitation here. Where do you think the water comes from? Think about it for a second. We used to have a space shuttle that would come to the International Space Station and resupply us with all sorts of food, experiments, supplies, and also because it did not have solar rays, it had hydrogen and oxygen, and they'd be combined in the fuel cell. The byproduct of that was an electron, which gave us energy and power to drive the shuttle. But the other byproduct was pure water. So they would transfer all that pure water over to the space station. So we had plenty of drinking water. So right now, we don't have the space shuttle anymore. It doesn't come up to provide supplies. We have other supply vehicles, but they don't supply us water because we are a closed system. As an engineer, you learn about a closed system. We are inside of the closed system. So when we run on the treadmill, Or when we on the bicycle, we're sweating, we're letting all that water out into the atmosphere. We have an air conditioning system that condensates, that sucks in all that condensation, and it cleans it and turns it back into drinking water. And the second big source of water that we have is, of course, going number one. So we specifically go number one, not where we go number two. So we have this whole collection of urine, and then it goes through a processing system. It gets cleaned up, and that's what we also drink as well as the condensate. So this is a closed system, and we're able to do that. And that technology has worked all over the world now. We use this technology for cleaning the water in places where they have natural disasters, and we can get clean water out of dirty water when a plumbing system doesn't work, for example. So it's a great system, and I've been up there, lived up there for a number of months, and had to drink that water, and I think I'm normal, so I think it's okay.
What does it feel like when you launch?
So launching on a rocket is pretty incredible. I'll just quickly show you what a Soyuz rocket looks like sort of like this. So they're all essentially like this rocket. The people are sitting way up here at the top. So we're only occupying this little teeny space right up here. All of this is engine and fuel that's getting you to space. So there's a lot of power that pushes you up into space. And rockets are usually staged, right? So this part right here, these pieces, that's one stage. Then this main body is a second stage. This is another stage right here. So one after another, these engines, there's engines down at the bottom here. All these engines light up, and you're sitting in your seat way up here. So if there's anything that moves, this is a moment time, and you can feel anything up here. The shuttle, for example, had flight control circuits. It had things like wings on the bottom that moved on the launch pad. You could feel that way up here on the top of that moment. Anyway, so the staging part, just like the shuttle, also had stages. As you start to launch, when these all the fuel gets burned out of these pieces, they drop off. That makes the spacecraft lighter. And then this piece, the second piece, goes, and when it runs out of fuel, it drops off, again making the spacecraft lighter. And then the third piece burns its fuel, it drops off, and leaves only what's left, the little piece at the top. So how does all that happen? That happens by small explosions. Well, actually, big explosions. All of these pieces are connected with pyro bolts. And so when you're way up here and all these pieces start coming off, you feel that. It's like a big boom inside the spacecraft. So if you watch inside video of a launch, for example, you'll see people's heads move a little bit as these big pyros are coming off. So it's cool, but it's a little scary because like I mentioned before, you're propelled right off the planet immediately, and then all of these crazy pyro things start happening as you're going faster and faster and faster. You feel a little G force. That means like the force of gravity. That's why it's called G. G pushing down on you here. When you're flying an airplane, for example, people worry about losing consciousness from G because the G is actually down this way, and it pulls all the blood out of your head a little bit. It makes you sort of lose consciousness. You are having a harder time pushing the blood back up to your head. It's different for a spacecraft. That G comes right here. And so as you're accelerating, that G is pushing on you. It almost feels like an elephant is sitting on your chest for about 30 seconds when you go through this max dynamic pressure. But once you go past that and you're going faster and the atmosphere is getting thinner and thinner and thinner as you're going up to space, that G comes off you a little bit. And then, like I said, as soon as the engine stops, boom, you're floating. So the ride is pretty spectacular, as you can understand. My first ride, I was on the mid deck. I didn't really have a role. I was just getting delivered to the space station. I was laughing. It was just like being on the best roller coaster you've ever been on. It's like getting to the top of the roller coaster and coming down the backside. And there's three of us down there, first time flyers, and we were just laughing, just loving it. We knew once you go, also, you're not coming back more than likely, right? There's usually once you go, a rocket goes, it launches, it lights, it goes, and you're not just turning around. You can't say, hey, I want to stop now. So, we're just enjoying the ride, loving it, knowing it was going to be, a number of minutes, and then we'd be in space.
Sunny, does it get smelly on ISS?
Good question. Does it get smelly on ISS? Well, you have to know, once again, I mentioned closed system, and there are 6 people living up there. Right now, we have 2 Soyuz going up at a time, so 2 Soyuz are docked to the space station, and each Soyuz has 3 people, so there's 6 people living in this airplane. And, sleeping, getting up, brushing your teeth, going to the bathroom, working all day, working out, going to the bathroom again, eating again. All this is going on, the daily life for 6 people inside this closed system. So yeah, actually it does smell a little bit about like people have lived in it. There's a ventilation system that moves the air around the space station. So you can actually smell sometimes while one end of the spacecraft is getting ready to eat. Maybe they've heated up their food, they've opened it up. The smell would come down to the other side of the space station, and you can tell that. But that's needed. That circulation system is needed to move that air around because in space we don't have wind, for example. So we need an artificial way to move the air. So you don't get a pocket, an invisible pocket of carbon dioxide, and then stick your head in there because you can't breathe that, right? So you need normal air. So we need some way to circulate around. So we all get to enjoy all the smells, which is, I guess, nice.
Is the spacesuit comfortable and how heavy is it?
Is the spacesuit comfortable and how heavy is it? So I've had the luxury of wearing a lot of spacesuits, but I think you're talking about the space walking suit. The space walking suit is a little bit different than what we call the launch and entry suit. We also wear a suit for the launch and when we come back to Earth because those are pretty dangerous and dynamic times, and we want to have another layer of protection with our spacesuit. When you go out to do a spacewalk, though, you wear this thing we call the EMU, I forgot the acronym. Mobility unit.
Extravehicular mobility unit.
Extravehicular mobility unit. It's this huge suit for all that name, EMU. It has 17 layers of material because it keeps us warm or cool because sometimes there's sun on us and sometimes there's not sun on us. So it's the thermal protection. It also protects us from micrometeorites, and that's why it has that 17 layers of material. If the meteorite hits the material, it can dissipate that energy, and we've tested that at some of the NASA centers. I'll give you an example. It looks like it's pretty thin, right here, but all these layers all have part of that. You see, all these layers have some role in the protection or the heating and cooling of us. So it looks pretty thin, but it's very good. So I'm thankful for this material. So the suit weighs probably about 300 pounds or so without any tools on it. Then you can put tools on it and you can get it up to about 500 pounds. It's pretty humongous. It's so far as weight, but it doesn't matter because you put it on when you're in space and it doesn't weigh anything. The thing that makes it hard to work in though is it's like a balloon. It's like you filled up a balloon and you were inside that balloon trying to work. The gloves are a little bit big and everything's filled with air. The air is pushing out. So all that material, which seems nice and soft, actually gets pretty rigid, and it's like hitting your hands against that material for about 6 hours when you're working, and it's like hard. It's almost like hitting your fingers against a desk for about 6 hours when you're just trying to work in the gloves to change out any broken pieces that are outside and replace them with pieces. So the work gets a little bit hard because it's a little bit hard to move your arms around inside the balloon, and then secondly, the material is very hard and it hurts your hands after a little while. But you know what? That's why we have exercise equipment up there. That's why we practice down here on Earth, and that's why we work out here on Earth. I think one of the things that is most important about being an astronaut or being able to be an astronaut is being healthy and being in good shape. You have to be in good shape not only to be able to work and do a spacewalk, but you're up there, and you may not even have a doctor with you while you're up there at a certain point in time. We have flight surgeons back on the ground, but we rely on ourselves to be pretty healthy before we go to space so that we can live up in space and come back and be healthy when we come back.
What is the most expensive thing that you've broken at work?
Oh, I don't even want to think about what the most expensive thing is that I've broken. When I was on one of my spacewalks, as a matter of fact, we had to change out a big circuit breaker box. And that box was, probably as big as myself. I'm about 5'8" tall, and that box was like my size. And it had 2 big bolts on either end of it, and we had used big equipment to try to undo these bolts. Well, unbeknownst to us, some of the bolts were stripped when they were putting the box in. We were trying to take it out. We sort of broke those bolts even more. We had to go make new tools to figure out how to get that box out because there's no hardware store up in space. We actually even used one of our toothbrushes connected to a long metal piece that we used to clean the bolts when we finally got it out. What other things? We made like an extendable arm to make a long manual ratchet while we were up there as well. So we ended up using the things that we had inside the space station to work on getting that box out. Now, don't think it was all my idea. we've got an army of people down here on the ground who help us and understand, like told us about the strip bolt later, how the history of the space station is and what happens to it. Those people are in mission control. And we also have not only the people in the front room of mission control, but then there's back rooms, and there's many, many more people who are experts at all of this, because the space station is huge and big, and a lot of other people own all those expensive parts, and we try not to break them. But every now and then, maybe I was working out too much, lifting too much, and broke a couple bolts here and there, but try not to do that.
I think there's probably several schools wondering, how do you go to the bathroom in space?
Oh, I was wondering when this question was going to come up. I alluded to it a little bit. I think I was probably taunting you with the water situation here. But yeah, going to the bathroom space is different than going on Earth. One of the things I really wanted to do when I came home was go to the bathroom here on Earth. It was like the best thing to be able to just sit down and go to the bathroom, because in space you don't sit down. I didn't sit down for like 6 months. I really didn't lay down either. There's nothing to lay down on. You have to just hover in your sleep station, and likewise you hover essentially over the bathroom. So there's a picture of the bathroom here with me. It's just really like a little can. You open the white part, which is the lid, and there's a little circle about this big that you go to the bathroom in. And like it's small, so like on Earth, there's like you don't worry about aim. In space, you have to worry a little bit about aim and making sure that you get things going in the right place. When you go number 2 in that little can, and on your right side, I guess you're looking at that hose. There's a hose on the wall there, and that hose is actually for number 1. So you actually have to do both of those things separately a little bit. They don't go into the same place, and that all goes back to that drinking water thing, right? So we want to keep our number 1 separated from our number 2. We have that inside of the can, and also in the hose, there's a little bit of suction, and secondary inside the can, we install a little bag, and the bottom of it has little perforations, and so that suction pulls that bag down. So as you go number 2 inside, all of that stuff gets pulled down a little bit, and then you release the little bag from that little circle, because the bag has a little edge, like on the top of a Ziploc bag type of thing on the top. You release that, and it goes into that can, and you fill that can up, and then you put a real cover on it, like a cap, a good strong cap with a tool to make sure it's closed. And we just take that can and put it in one of our spacecraft that is going to be our trash spacecraft. So we have a lot of spacecraft that come up and deliver food and experiments and clothes, and when we unload those, they get all of our trash. So those little cans of number 2 get put into that spacecraft, and then they burn up on the atmosphere. And the number 1, like I mentioned, goes back and gets recycled and turns into tomorrow's fruit punch.
We have a school that says they do a lot of STEM, and they really want to have a STEM job when they're older. Do you have any tips or advice for girls who want STEM careers?
Sure. Be curious. That's really the biggest thing. And don't tell people, don't let people tell you that you can't do that. I think girls are just as curious as boys are, and that is really all that STEM is about, right? STEM is trying to figure out how things work, how to make things work better, right? I flew helicopters, and the helicopter that I flew didn't know if I was a boy or girl. I did spacewalks. The spacesuit didn't know if I was a boy or girl, so it doesn't really matter. The pieces of equipment that you're working with, if you're designing a bridge or building a ship or building a spacecraft, that all just takes curiosity, innovation, and you have it, and don't ever think that you don't have it. So I think girls are just as curious as boys, and they can do all these jobs. I haven't run across any major problems in my career. I think I've formed a lot of good friendships with all of the guys during my career, just being part of the team. And I think just be part of the team.
So a couple of interesting ones. Which do you like better, flying helicopters or being in space?
I don't know. That's tough. Both of those are pretty awesome.
And if you had to change careers or do something else, what would you do?
Okay, so do I prefer helicopters or space? I don't know. They're both pretty awesome, and I love airplanes too. All of that's flying and looking at our planet from our Earth from being above it is pretty spectacular. I would encourage anybody who has any desire to do that to do it, because it's just fun. All careers have a little bit of time when things get frustrating, but when you sit back and go, wow, look what I'm doing. I'm flying in an airplane, or I'm flying a helicopter, or I'm flying to a ship out in the ocean, which was I did as a Navy helicopter pilot. It was just beautiful. I mean, I remember sunsets and sunrises in the ocean because I was on the ships flying, and it was just spectacular. Being in space, again, looking out the window, like, wow. And all of these jobs, you know, there's so much fun to be had because you work with a lot of people, which is pretty great. The people really make it, and then the ability to actually challenge yourself to do something that maybe you didn't think you could do before. What was the second question?
If you had to change
Oh,
careers,
if I had to
what
change
would you
careers.
do?
If I had to change careers, wow, there's so many things out there to do. I mean, it's like cool because I probably wouldn't be a veterinarian, but I probably would want to be a vet tech, which would be pretty fun. And because I love animals, like I said, so working with animals would be probably one of the highest things on my priority list. Secondly, I love working on machines. I want to actually, after I finish this, go and maybe get my airplane mechanics license because I like working on airplanes and I want to know how to do it officially. So there's so many things to do. I don't know. I would also love to, you know, have a garden and, you know, be a florist. I think that would be sort of fun too. So, I mean, there's so many cool things to do and life is relatively long, so you get to do a lot. So you'll see me doing other things in the future.
So many different forms that this question has come. Have you ever seen anything really weird in space, or do you believe in aliens?
Have I ever seen anything weird in space? Yeah, always weird in space because my roommates are weird. So I saw all sorts of weird things in space. But getting to your point, we are pretty close to the Earth, right? So we are only 250 miles above the planet. So think about that. That's not very far from, in my perspective, that's only like from Boston to New York. You know, it's not very, that's very high. So there are, you know, if we go back to the moon or onto Mars, then we're a little bit, you know, going farther, leaving our little area here around our planet. And then maybe you might see something, but where I've flown, I haven't seen anything. You know, and I'm being a little joking slightly, but you know, when you look out at the sky, and I'll tell you also, when you look out the window, look at the universe from space, you don't get that blurry vision of our atmosphere blurring your eyes, and you can really see, you know, millions, billions of stars. And if you go to, I'm sure if you go in north of Scotland, where there's not a lot of, you know, there's not a lot of lights up there, you probably see millions and billions of stars. And what is the probability that maybe one of those stars has a planet like ours that has life on it? I think it's probably pretty good. So I bet you there's something out there. We just haven't found it.
So a few questions related to can you describe what it looks like in space? How big is space? And how do you know which way to go? Is there a space map?
How do you know what to do and where you're going in space, right? So that's a great question. Space is huge, and you know, like you look at the night sky, and it sort of looks like a planetarium, where you like almost like a plane, like one edge, and then that's where the stars are. But when you're in the space station and you're looking out toward the universe, you really get that sense that it's 3D. I mean, it's going and going and going, and you almost get the sense that some stars might be closer than others. It doesn't look like it's a flat plane in a planetarium. So it really looks extensive. So how do we go? How do we know where we're going? We don't get lost. Well, in low Earth orbit, as we're close to the Earth, we're in that orbit, and because we're going at speed, we're just on that orbit, going around and around and around. And every now and then, actually, we slow down a little bit. We have to do a reboost to keep us on that orbit, but we're just going around that track. We see a lot of the Earth because the Earth rotates underneath us as we go on that same track around the planet, but the Earth is turning. So that's why we see a lot of the Earth. But now the other question is like, how do you know how to get to the moon? How do you know how to get to Mars, which we've done before? I'm not that smart to understand all of that orbital mechanics, but we take advantage of different bodies, like we take advantage of the gravity field of the Earth and then the gravity field of the moon to try to get us to the next place. And then we also have engines on our spacecraft. And very smart people at Jet Propulsion Lab and here at Johnson Space Center and at Goddard Space Center and other space centers around the planet know how to put these trajectories in the computer, send data up through satellites to the spacecraft, and then they know where they're going to go. So, engineering in STEM is not only, like I mentioned, building things and inventing new things, but it's also the science of understanding how all that works, how computer systems work, how satellites work. So, I mean, you guys are going to have to figure some of this stuff out because we're going to keep going farther and farther. There's a lot of smart people out there right now to help us, help you, and a lot of people get on that step and get going, but you're going to need to do more.
So what do you think happens inside a black hole?
Oh boy, what do I think happens inside a black hole? That's not my area of expertise, so I don't really know. I just know that I think it would be not a good thing to have your spacecraft go near it, because who knows what's going to happen. You're going to get sucked in and go out someplace else. So luckily enough, there's not any black holes right in close to the International Space Station, so I don't have to worry about that. But I think you guys might have to study that in school and figure out a little bit more about that, because that might be something you might have to worry about.
Separate questions, but what is the adaptation time like for when you get to space, and then when you come home, how long does it take to readapt?
Yeah, so we're talking about adaptation. I mentioned already about trying to stay fit and being healthy. And being fit and healthy really helps those processes go a little quicker and a little bit easier, because I will say it is a little bit of like a Mack truck coming and hit you, going up and going down in certain ways. So when you get up to space, right, you know, everything starts to float. Even things inside of you start to float. Even your organs move around a little bit as much as they can, but they're connected a little bit. But even that starts to happen. And so all your natural things about you is a little bit weird. Going to the bathroom for the first time in space is a little weird because you don't have gravity, which you normally do here, not just for the physical act of it, but your insides, for your body to understand that it has to actually now work a little bit harder to push stuff out. Gravity's not here to help it. And your balance also gets a little messed up, right? Because your inner ear helps. There's like fluid in your inner ear that understands that gravity is pushing down on it and it's helping you understand when you turn your head so you don't fall over. In space, there's no gravity. This stuff is floating inside of your inner ear and your head, and that connection of like, if I turn my head, how do I feel? Make you get a little bit dizzy while you're up in space. So there's a thing called space adaptation sickness, and I had it. I didn't recognize it at first. I was flying around like a crazy person, going up to the mid deck and then head down, back down, spinning around, just because it was fun and why not do it? And the next thing I knew, I threw up. And I threw up, put that in the trash, and then did a couple things, went to sleep. The next morning, I felt like I lived in space. So it took a little while for my brain to understand, and that's called your neurovestibular system. Make sure your neurovestibular system gets adapted, and then I was fine. So I felt great up in space, and then coming back to Earth, I thought, oh, this should be easy. I feel awesome. But there's, again, just like explosions going up, there's a couple explosions coming down as parts of your spacecraft that you don't need anymore, like your solar arrays or this a storage compartment, all, you know, come off of the spacecraft, and you end up in this capsule under a parachute and then land under gravity. So after 6 months, that was the first time I felt gravity, when we were under the parachute, and I felt myself, you know, a little hard to get my head up in my seat. And then we hit the ground, we roll around a little bit, the spacecraft stops, and then the rescue forces come, they open the door and they pull you out. It's not that you can't walk, because we were up in space, we were on the treadmill, we're on the bicycle, we have a weightlifting machine, but your neurovestibular system again has to go through that transition of like, oh, now there's gravity, and now I don't want to turn my head and fall over. So folks help you out a little bit. Again, you feel like things are heavy, like your head was heavy. All these little muscles in your neck you don't realize right now you're using to hold up your head. While you're up in space, all those muscles were not used. Your head just floated up. So all of a sudden I had it like, okay, use those muscles again. My neck was sore. Just my feet were a little bit sore. I hadn't really walked except when I was on the treadmill. So walking on the ground, the bottom of my feet were real tender. Up in space, you end up losing some of the little calluses you might have on your feet after a little while when you're here on Earth, particularly like if you're a runner, your feet get a little bit, you know, hardened. Up in space, that all starts to go away. So my feet were real tender when I came back. My butt was really tender when I came back too. Like I said, I didn't sit down for 6 months, so sitting for a little while when I came back really hurt after, you know, and I got used to that. So all these little adaptation things happen. But you know, either place, when you get to space, you don't have gravity, so you have to adapt. And when you get back to Earth, you have gravity, so you will adapt.
So what's the longest you've been in space, and what's the longest you would spend in space? Would you ever just stay there?
So I've been in space the longest time at one time was 6.5 months, about 100, almost 200 days. and it went by very fast. There was so much to do on the International Space Station. You know, we're putting it together. We're doing science experiments. We're doing spacewalks. Using the robotic arm to, to fly pieces around or people outside around. So it was busy and it was really fun. How long would I want to stay in space? I think a year would be pretty good. I don't think I would get bored on the International Space Station in a year because there's lots of things to do. You know, when we're starting to take a long trip to maybe go to Mars, it might take about 6 months or so. You have in the back of your mind, this is the psychological part of space, right? So you have in the back of your mind, oh, I'm going someplace new. I'm going to do something cool and land on another planet. That would be really fun. And also then the 6 month ride back would be great because you'd be thinking about coming home. That during that time frame of that 6 months, though, you have to have something to do. I think that's one of the things we've found. Also, we want people not to be bored. You have to do something. If it's not read a book, have a hobby, do something, work on the equipment, do something. But for me personally, if I had the opportunity to go to Mars, for sure I'd go to Mars, and that would be, probably at least a year and a half.
Do you ever get anxious about being able to come home? Like when it's time to come home?
You get anxious about coming home. I think there's just a little nervousness. I mean, I have faith in the spacecraft that we're flying, but they'll take us to space and they'll bring us back. I have faith in the training that we have to understand any what we call malfunctions or off-nominal things that happen to the spacecraft that we can control and we can fix. And we train a lot for that. So I didn't really have any hesitation about coming back in those spacecraft because we understand quite a bit about them and we want to make sure that people are coming back home. I think the more apprehension though is like when you're living in a small place with only, with 6 people, only 5 other people, and then you come back and there's so many people here on Earth. Just that, a little bit of apprehension of that, a little bit of apprehension of you hadn't seen your family, I hadn't seen my husband, for 6 months, and I want to look good, want to say hi, want to give everybody a big hug, and just a little bit of apprehension about that.
Oh, we have a happy belated birthday greeting. Did you have a great day yesterday?
I have a wonderful day yesterday. I got to hang out with a couple of my friends actually from work for a little while. It so happens there's 3 people in the astronaut office with the same birthday. So we all were together, Rick Lenahan, myself, and Kayla Barron, one of the newest astronauts. And then I have a couple dogs, so I took my dogs in my friend's school.
That's awesome. What made you originally want to become an astronaut or to come to NASA?
Yeah, originally, like I was talking about, I was really happy as a helicopter pilot. I love flying helicopters. But I had the opportunity, like I mentioned, to come here and learn what people do here. And as a test pilot, this is like the same type of thing. We test spacecraft here. That's what we're doing. Even the shuttle flights, which were like one after another, each of them were different and a little bit of a test, to try out different systems, to try different equipment that we were using on board. So all of that was a test. And I liked it. It's like reaching the next, for the next thing, the next boundary, the next edge. It's a new challenge. And so I think that's probably what I like about it. I think I like the challenge.
Can you do backflips in space, and do you feel sleepy when you're in space?
Can you do backflips? Oh man, I felt, when we were up there in 2012, the Olympics were going on. We were watching all the gymnastics and stuff, and we could do all that stuff in space too. Well, okay, there's no gravity, so you're not going to fall, I suppose. But yes, you can do backflips. You can do front flips. You can do all that kind of crazy stuff, and it's really fun. You feel sleepy in space? Well, yes and no. I think it took a little while to. I mean, originally when we fly up to space, there's a lot going on, right? That the whole day to get you prepared to go to space, to get you in your spacesuit, to have your last meal on Earth before you go, to say goodbye to your family and friends, to get in the spacecraft, and then it takes a couple hours to make sure the spacecraft is ready to go, make sure you're ready to go, and then you launch. So that day is pretty long. And people are pretty exhausted by the time they get up to orbit. Like I mentioned, my first flight, I immediately, after I did a little work, got sick, and then I went to bed and I felt good the next day. Generally up in space, we do get tired because the day is long. On a regular basis, to include physical fitness, we have to work out every day. There's no gravity up there. So if you stopped working out, even for a day, your bone density would start to decrease. Your muscle mass starts to decrease. You don't need your bones. You don't need as much muscles up in space because you're floating, right? Your bone structure is a structure to hold you up. Your muscles are helping you do things working against gravity. So we had to work out every day for about 2 hours, at least an hour or so on the aerobic stuff, the bike or the treadmill, and then an hour lifting weights with our ARED machine up there. And that, of course, just makes your body tired. So by the end of the day, yeah, you're pretty tired. And there's a lot going on. There's a lot of stimulus of things that are different from life on Earth. So yeah, you're pretty tired.
So there was a question related to a triathlon in space, but I think it's the marathon that you ran while you were in space. Can you tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, I went on my first flight. It so happened that the Boston Marathon was running at the same time. So I ran I actually qualified for the Boston Marathon the year before. So my sister went to the race director and got me a registration. So I ran the Boston Marathon at the same time. My sister actually ran it on the ground too. On my second flight, I was challenged to do a triathlon, so I did it, and a little bit different than Earth, right? You could try and swim in space. It would be easy, I suppose. You don't have to push against anything, but I didn't want to cheat that bad, so I got on our advanced resistive exercise machine, which essentially is 2 cylinders of vacuum. You can dial in the vacuum to about 600 pounds or so. That's how we do deadlifts and squats, some heavy weight. To keep our bone density up, particularly in our pelvis and our legs and our ankle area. So I dialed in some weights and I did like a head to toe workout on the ARED. You can also do bench, you can do shoulders, so you can do the whole body type of workout. You just have to change the machine pieces in between. So I did that for about a half an hour, and then I did the actual biking. Our trainers are able to program in different resistance on the bike. So I mirrored the same course, which was a little bit hilly in Malibu, California, and then I ran on the treadmill the amount. So I did a triathlon and a marathon in space. We'll see what I do next time.
Excuse me, one of the questions is what your role was while you were on space station, the kind of jobs that you did while you were on space station.
Okay, what was the role? I'm going to go back real quickly to the marathon and the triathlon. Part of the reason I did those things, and this is part of our role, right, is to outreach and talk to people and connect with people while we're up in space. But part of the reason I did all that was I wanted to emphasize that physical fitness, I think, is one of those things that it's part of everybody's life, and you have to do it whether you realize it or not. Go for a walk every day, take the dog for a walk, whatever you got to do is move around, and that's an important part of life. You have to do it even when you're in space, obviously. So what other things do we do besides our workout? Like I mentioned, well, we're doing a lot of science experiments while we're up there. The space station took about 10 years to be put together. So my first flight, I was actually a construction worker and put part of the station together. In the meantime, though, we did some science experiments. But now my second flight, the space station is built. It has all its modules, the European module, the Japanese module, U.S. laboratory, the Russian laboratory. So we have science experiments going on all the time, inside and outside of the spacecraft, and we're part of those. Also, we're the only ones living there, right? So if something breaks, we have to do maintenance and we fix it, and we have to clean it all the time. So even cleaning the toilet is part of a weekly job that we have to do to make sure that we can all live in the space station. And then on the good days, we get to do some really good days. We get to do spacewalks. We go outside. Maybe we're fixing something outside, or maybe we're adding a new experiment to the outside of the space station. And then sometimes there's those visiting vehicles that I was talking about, like a SpaceX Dragon or an orbital Cygnus or a Japanese HTV that come up. And those spacecraft need to be grabbed. They come and hover next to the space station, and then we use the robotic arm and we grab those spacecraft, and then we dock them to the International Space Station. And it's just like the store arrived, and then you unpack all that, and then you pack it all back up with trash for stuff that's coming back home. So it's pretty busy. Every day is different. It's never like redundant, one thing after another. Every day seems like different. There's a great group of people on the ground who know the people who are up there, and they plan what we're going to do on a 6-month basis. Then they see how we're doing, and then they look at the 3-month time frame, and then they even look at week to week to make sure all the things that they want us to do is getting done. It's busy. It's fun though. Every day is different.
So I believe we're going to turn it over to the hosts to kind of wrap things up. They should be unmuting pretty quickly.
Hello. Well, so can you hear me? Are we muted? Sorry, can you hear me? Just like to say thank you very, very much. Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. It's been a fascinating hour and so. Sorry.
I said thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to everybody. I hope I answered a couple questions.
Oh, it's a fabulous and fascinating hour. It's been wonderful. So I think on behalf of all the schools that joined in and on behalf of Primary Engineer, thank you so much. It was wonderful. And hopefully we'll speak to you again sometime.
Absolutely. Hope to come to Scotland again, and I hope folks come and visit us here at Johnson Space Center. We're always here. A lot of exciting things going on.
We have to do that. So we're going to have to close now. So and as I say, hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Bye-bye.